So Adrian, do you want to take the floor and introduce your amazing panel? Thank you so much.
Shafi, do you want to do one more there as well? Then there's not four.
Fantastic.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, and welcome to our panel session this morning. My name is Adrian Stabbert-Dobson. I'm a doctor by background, and I'm the CEO of SafeHand Consulting. For those of you who don't know what we do, we are the UK's largest provider of outsourced clinical safety officer services. What that means is that in this country, if you manufacture or you implement health IT systems, then you are obliged to undertake a very particular type of safety assessment on that product. And that is done according to two standards called DCB 129 and DCB 160. Importantly, that work has to be done by an individual who has been specially trained and who is experienced in doing so. And these individuals are called clinical safety officers. So my day job is to look after a team of 16 professional clinical safety officers who are all employees of our business. And we act as the clinical safety officer for around 150 organisations in total. We also provide mentorship and software solutions as well to help people along the way. So let me tell you about today's panel session. So one of the great things about my job is that I get the opportunity to work with many different trusts who are travelling this journey. But one thing that is very apparent is that there's a great deal of variability between organisations in terms of their success of implementing DCB 160. So that's led us to ask the question, just what is it that sets the top performers apart? So I'm joined today by a panel of experts in this matter. I have a member of my own team. We have a couple of representatives from NHS Trusts who are travelling this journey, and also a representative from NHS England who govern and look after the standards. So I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves, and I'll start by handing over to Sue in my team, who will chair the session for today. Thank you.
Hi everybody and welcome. I'm Sue Davis. I'm an adult nurse and health visitor by background. I've been working in digital since 2009. I've been a clinical safety officer since 2011, and I've worked for SafeHand since 2020. Sebastian.
Hi, good morning everybody. Thanks Adrian. I'm Dr. Sebastian Alexander. I'm a GP up in Cambridge. I've actually been a GP, I was adding my years up, of 34 years this year in general practice. But my other part of my big job is actually working for NHS England with the clinical safety team. So I chair the clinical safety group for NHS England, previously NHS Digital, now called NHS England. So I work with a number of safety engineers and other doctors within the clinical safety team, basically making sure that any new IT pushed into the NHS is clinically safe and have followed the standards, the safety standards, which we'll hear more about later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lucy?
Yeah. I'm Lucy Jenks. I'm the lead clinical safety officer for Black Country Healthcare Mental Health Trust. I've been doing it for just over a year now, so I'm relatively new on the journey.
Hi everyone, my name's Stacey Hatton. I'm the Chief Nursing Information Officer at University Hospitals of Derby and Burton. Nurse by profession, and I have been a clinical safety officer since 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. So I'm really delighted to welcome our panel here today, who are here to share their experiences, and it's just very important to note that the panel attendance today is not a direct endorsement of SafeHand. They're here to share their experiences of being on the safety journey. So I'm going to start us off by posing a question, or a few questions to the panel, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. So if you've got any burning questions about clinical safety that you'd like to address to the panel, you maybe want to be thinking about those as we start our discussions. So to conduct effective clinical risk management activities and comply with DCB 160, we need to think about people, processes and tools. So starting with people, what do the panel feel needs to be in place? And can I come to you first, Sebastian?
Thanks very much. Well, I'm a clinician, as I said, and so I think the first thing to have in place is your clinical safety team and your named clinical safety officer. Many of the trusts and ICBs we still visit and are in contact with don't have any clinical safety officer expertise and input. Many do, I think, but I think that's the first thing to have in place. So a good team of clinical safety experts. Now, when I say a team, I also mean the project manager, the implementation teams who are dealing with new implementations of safety products. But I think clinical input is so important, and trying to find a suitably trained and qualified clinical safety officer remains a big challenge, I think, and something that NHS England and other organisations are well aware of, to make sure the CSOs are properly trained up and also properly supported going forward. So when they are newly in post, to make sure your clinical safety team have some guidance and some support from other bodies and organisations, and it's something that NHS England are very much aware of and trying to support in that role. As I said, I'm part of the clinical safety team, so one of my raison d'etres is to make sure that systems are safe that are deployed, and I think that we're getting there. And I've been in post now for 12 years, so I've seen a huge shift and increase in number of clinical safety officers. So that'd be my first point, really. CSOs.
Thank you. Stacey, can I come to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to focus on leadership and accountability, because I absolutely agree with everything that Sebastian has said about the training. And when I first came into post in my current organisation, we didn't have a list of who our clinical safety officers were in the organisation. And I think from a leadership perspective, we need to ensure that clinical safety is taken really seriously. So thinking about our other safety critical industries, such as aviation, for instance, there's that embedded culture where safety is completely embedded throughout the organisation. So I know Sue said that this is not an endorsed panel speech, however, and they said we don't have to say anything about it. I do just want to give a big thank you to Safe Hand, who've supported us on our journey, because we didn't have many processes in place when I first came into post, and we, with the support of Safe Hand, we've been able to do safety sponsor training. So our executive has received that safety sponsor training, so they know all about clinical safety. We've also held sessions for our quality governance steering group, which is led by our chief nurse. So really getting that top-down approach so people understand the importance, and obviously see this as as taking risks seriously, like we do with incidents that happen in our clinical areas. We've also held sessions for our head of governance, director of governance, head of patient safety, because if we know that our leaders are taking this seriously, then we can really start embedding that culture.
Thank you. Lucy?
Yeah, I'd agree with Stacey. We have our CCIO is actually on the trust board, and she's our clinical safety sponsor. So where the responsibility lies with me in doing the assessments and making sure that that is up to date. She actually has the accountability for making sure that this is done across the trust. And with her sitting in such a senior position, again, she's able to get that kind of the importance of clinical safety across for the trust and get that buy-in from senior leaders. And I think, that's so important. That it's not just a tick box exercise. It is something that senior leaders really see the value of and the reasoning behind it.
Thank you. Adrian, you got the short straw, you're going last.
Yeah, it's always hard, isn't it? Yeah, I think for me, really, just building on those points that have been made, there's one real thing that we find makes a huge difference between trusts who do this well and perhaps those who perhaps don't do it so well, and that's team stability. So it turns out that this thing of complying with DCB 129 and 160, it's not the kind of thing you can learn to do in an afternoon, or even with the best will in the world, a couple of days training course. To give you some idea, our own clinical safety officers, when they join us in the team, even if they've done safety before, it takes them about 6 months. And that's 6 months of doing this day in, day out, nothing else. And it's 6 months before they are completely independent and don't need every one of their documents reviewing. So what that's telling you is that this takes quite some time to learn. Now, you're only going to get that experience if your team is stable. If you have a revolving door of clinical safety officers who maybe come in, do a bit of training, have a go at it, and then get fed up and go on and do something else, you will never build up that critical mass of expertise that is needed. Once you've got it, then you can sustain a little bit of a revolving door. But what you can't do is constantly have a team of training apprentices. The effect that has is you'll find that things become very inefficient because people are always taking time to learn, but also you get a lot of inconsistency and everybody ends up doing it their own way. So to get that team stability, what do you need? Support. You've got to support these people. Taking an individual and giving them 20 projects and saying, right, that's you now, you've got to sign all of those off. Those individuals are frankly going to go off and do something else. So you have to look after them to try and get that team stability in place.
Thank you. And of course, we hear that all the time, don't we? Can you sign this off? And it's not actually about signing it off. It's about undertaking the risk management activity and providing that recommendation to whoever's approving the project for go live. So the same question then, in terms of what does good look like? What do we need in terms of processes? Stacey, can I come to you first, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to add to that last one as well, the importance of a multidisciplinary team. So this is not just about nurses or doctors, this is a full clinical multidisciplinary team because everyone brings something very different to the table. I just wanted to add that to that. So in terms of processes, I'll give you a few things, but I think, and then I'll give you something that's really practical to take away. So in terms of the processes, I think governance is key in all of this. So making sure that the clinical safety work feeds into your governance structure. And something that we hear a lot is know your numbers. So how many systems have we got? How many of those have had their clinical safety case report completed? Also known as how many have had their DCB 0160 deliverables met. So I think we need to know about those things, but in order to do that, we need to strip that back and understand how do we involve the clinical safety officer in the first place? What's the full process from project initiation right through to involving the CSO? And then obviously, how does the annual review look like? What if a critical incident happens? How are we looping back round to the clinical safety DCB 0160 deliverables? So looking at that whole process. And Lucy, I'm not going to take this next bit because you're going to talk about some of the things that you've been doing with Sue, and it's very replicable to what we have been doing. But so ensuring that the governance is right. And I think you need to make a decision, and again, this comes back to the executives in the team, around are you going to do a debt assurance review of your legacy systems, or are you going to leave those and look at the systems that are being implemented going forward? Because I think that's a huge decision that has to be made by the board. And one of the practical things that I want to give you is to work backwards with dates in terms of processes, because I think that's really important. Obviously, there's key milestones as part of the DCB 0160 deliverables, but if you work backwards from project go live to the current date, then you will really see that that's hugely beneficial.
Thank you. Lucy.
Thank you. Yeah, completely agree with everything you've said, Stacey. But the other thing I would add to that is So yeah, the first thing we did, working again with SafeHand, was look at our asset log, like you say, the historic systems, the new systems coming in. So create that, but then we looked at our governance, our process and policy, and again worked with SafeHand to make sure we've got a robust policy, and that's supported with SOPs as well. So across the organisation, different departments know what their responsibility in this process is as well, because it's not, as you said, it's not just down to the clinical safety officer. It's important to make sure you've got intelligent procurement. We've changed it so we have one front door for all digital to come in, so clinicians can request things, but equally if we've got projects going on, it all comes through a central governance process, and that central governance process then involves the clinical safety and the cyber security and IG as well. So it's kind of merging it with existing structures that you've got across the trust as well, and just fitting it in so that it works for your organisation, fitting in with the patient safety team again, so that around that incident monitoring, the DCB standards state that you've got to have a safety log for any incidents that happen within your systems, but you've also probably got a trust reporting mechanism, and you've also probably got an IT reporting system. So it's bringing everything together so that you've got that one kind of dashboard that you can see and match everything up, and know that actually everything that's going into IT, if it needs to, is going into your reporting system, because that reporting system then will be feeding into the national reporting as well. So it's looking at the national agenda as well and building in what you can across your organisation to fit in with that. Governance is I've spent a lot of time in our trust trying to get that right, because I think that's your underlying structure. If you can get that bit right, it's really going to help when you come to do the systems. But if you're constantly having to battle these different things, and you create an asset log, but then you don't know what there's different things coming in through different routes, that's going to be no good. You've got to make sure that what you put in place you can then stay on top of as well, particularly because often in trusts we are a very limited resource. So it's trying to be clever about how you use your skills and your time, and make use of other areas of the trust that can be doing some of this and supporting some of this as well, and just really embedding it so that it does become part of the trust governance. So all your IGG meetings, quality and safety, it's reporting into all these different areas, so people start to see, actually this is important, I do need to take this seriously, this can have an effect on our patients.
Thank you, Lucy. Adrian.
Yeah, I think for me, there's an important difference between having a process and actually working to that process. I think there's a great temptation for us to create a process in order to tick that first requirement in the standard that says you need to have a clinical risk management process in place. I think too frequently people will work to create that process. They'll kind of store it on a SharePoint folder somewhere, and the next time they look at it, or anyone else looks at it, will be the following year when they're updating it. So that's not what having a process means. It has to be embedded within an organisation, and everyone has to be working to it. Clinicians being clinicians, and I say that as one, we have a temptation to go away and do things in our own way. And because we're clinicians, we all think we're doing it the right way, but we all end up doing it a different way. And you can't have that. You have to be consistent. So that process needs to be in place, and it needs to be worked to. Now, that's only going to work if it's governed. And the current version of the standards say very, very little about governance of that standard, the governance of the process. Unfortunately, what governance often becomes is a signature right at the very end on the safety case that says, yeah, I've looked at it and I've blessed it and we can wish it on its way. That's not how things work. You need to have someone in your organisation who is responsible and indeed accountable for making sure that people actually create, sign off, approve, and implement that process, that everyone in there is absolutely following it. Because people being people, they won't follow it unless you encourage them to do so.
Thank you. Sebastian.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with that, Adrian, absolutely. And I think having a CSMS, Clinical Safety Management System, in place it's a nice name, isn't it? But actually making sure that it's implemented and someone's responsible for that is really important. I'd like just to bring in another aspect of this, of other processes. We hear a lot about cyber and information governance, and you mentioned this briefly, but making sure there's some link up with your cyber team within the trust or ICB, and also with your governance team, because safety is about, patient safety is about governance and IG and cyber as well. So making sure those processes are in place. The other thing I'd like to really stress is making sure you understand the actual incident management process, which we always talk about, making sure that you understand how to report an incident and how that reflects back onto your safety case and into your hazard log. And I think the question about how far do you go back, many of the trusts that we're dealing with, and indeed I'm sure you are, Adrian, as well, are implementing new systems, and we're often asked a question about, well, what about our legacy system? What about the system we implemented in the trust 10 years ago? And my personal view on that, maybe not shared by all of the panel, is actually don't worry about the legacy systems. They're proven in use. And then, but go back in date order if you've got time to do that, but address the new system implementation first of all. But if there's a legacy pathology system that has been working for many, many years, certainly look at it, but don't make that a priority. But make sure when you're implementing your new system, you look at what other systems are integrating with that. So I think the incident management process for me is really so important. And I think within, just talking about NHS England, within NHS England we get far too few safety incident reports through relating to clinical digital systems. So they're getting lost somewhere, I think. It's a big problem still.
Thank you. And the last part of that question, 15, 20 minutes ago, was what tools do you need in place? So can I come to you first, please, Lucy?
So I think we've already mentioned the asset log was the first thing that we put in place. You've got the standards, the DCB standards, and their applicability guidelines as well. You've got the policies and SOPs that you can put in place. You've got different hazard log formats. So there's the NHSE format. There's various ones out there. I think some trusts will kind of make it their own in a way, and there are tools that you can use as well. So we're going to be trialling a new tool soon that SafeHand are releasing. So again, not endorsed, but I'm very excited for that. So once you start doing some of this clinical safety work, and you realise how long some of these hazard logs can take, and then extracting the information from it and putting it into the clinical safety report in the right places and things like that, I'm really excited about the time savings that I think a tool are going to have in that respect. Lots of different tools that you can use.
Stacey, have you got anything to add to that?
Nothing much. I think having the templates is key to this, and having them in a shared space. I know you mentioned about SharePoint site earlier, Adrian. I completely agree with your point there, but you need that SharePoint site. Well, it doesn't have to be SharePoint, but one shared space where you can all collaborate as well, so you know that you're all using the same documentation. Also, having support was touched on earlier, but having regular catch-ups with the team, and whilst it's not necessarily a tool, it will support with, being able to populate the templates, etc.
Thank you. Sebastian?
I think the vital tool I always say is that make sure that you understand what's the risk matrices you're using within the trust and your risk assessment. You mentioned that briefly, but I think that's so important. The standards have a version of that, the DCB standards, so you can look at what's recommended. It's not mandated, but many trusts that I visit have very different risk matrices that they're using. And something I always focus in of the team and the clinical safety officers to make sure that definitions are understood. So your likelihood and severity definitions are clearly defined within your trust, because the DCB standards go part the way towards that definition. There are some examples in there, but understanding how your trust actually risk assess the particular the severity of the hazard and the harm of the hazard is really so important. So understand your risk matrix and how they align. And the other thing I think is another tool, I suppose, is the job planning tool, if I can use that term. Many of the CSOs I meet have very variable commitments to be clinical safety officers, whether they be consultants, whether they be allied health professionals, nurses, or occupational therapists. As long as someone's got a professional registration body, that's fine. But the amount of time they spend on safety is often minimal. It's shoehorned into their existing job plan. They may have 1 or 2 hours per week. So I think under the tools, I'd say actually it's up to the CSO and the safety team to try and define how much time that clinical safety person does need from the trust to maintain their task. And as you said, Adrian, it's a big task and under-resourced, I think. And at the moment, I think it's something that we haven't paid enough attention to. We are trying to come up with some guidelines around size of trusts, how many hours of CSO time is needed. It comes down to the size of the systems also being used. So it's work in progress a little bit, but haven't got a definite answer on number of hours, but have that discussion.
Thank you. Adrian. Sorry,
Can
Lucy
I
just wants to come in.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to that as well, that's really, really good point. And there is a part of the standard that does say that top management must make sure that it's adequately resourced as well. And I have been able to use that argument within our trust to get extra resource to help tackle some of the assurance debt that is maybe going to impact on future systems coming in, so our EPR, things like that. So yeah, it's again, it's another useful way to use what's in the standards to kind of argue that it's your responsibility to make sure that you are resourcing this, and this is an adequate resource. We use the assurance debt report that Safe Hand helped us produce to show that actually this is how long assuring this debt is going to take. So this is the amount of resource that you need to fund for it. So yeah, really good point about the funding of it, because it is underfunded. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy. Really good point. Well made. Adrian.
Yeah, in terms of which tools are useful, I suppose I turn to my team and see what tools they tend to use day to day. And one jumps out quite clearly more than anything else, and that is your hazard log. Now, why do I say that? It's because so many people see a hazard log as being a document. It's something that you just kind of write at the end of the process in order to tick that box and say, yeah, we've got a hazard log now. That's not how you should be using it. A hazard log should be a tool. And what that tool should do is drive change. So if you have identified a series of hazards and causes, the likelihood is that you will have lined up a number of controls or mitigations, things that you have systematically put in place to make sure that that risk is mitigated. But that's only going to work if those controls are real. And what you will find, it's just human nature, there is a temptation to put all sorts of things into your hazard log. And it's only when you come to actually evidence them that the things that you thought were in place are actually not. So when my team are working, realistically, there's never a time when they're working on a project and they don't have that hazard log open. And they're in there trying to find, what causes and what controls have we got in here that we actually haven't been able to prove that are real? Or what hazards have we got in here where actually the initial risk and residual risk are basically the same because the controls that are in place are either non-existent or are typically ineffective. So it's important, and you need to make sure that you have got the right physical tool to do that, whether that is an Excel spreadsheet, whether you are using a tool such as the product that we produce with Safety Logics or some other tool, but you need something in place to fuel that. It shouldn't just be a passive document that is kind of an afterthought and is there for the process of sign-off at the end of the day.
Thank you. Right, I'd like to throw questions open from the audience now. Has anybody got any questions that they'd like to put to the panel?
Thank you so much.
Could you just say who you are and where you're from?
Yeah, hello, my name's Kimberly. I'm from Bedfordshire Foundation Trust. I'm a Senior Digital Clinical Safety Officer, full-time, just to rub it in a bit.
Excellent.
So obviously we've had a lot of discussion about the DCB 0160, but actually our biggest concern is that of the DCB 0129, which a lot of the time isn't being provided by the supplier or isn't in a good enough format or readable format to actually move forward to create a good, strong DCB 0160. So how do we move forward with this in making sure that suppliers are accountable?
Thank you. Sebastian, can I ask you to answer that one?
Thanks very much. Yeah, a frequent problem within the contracting NHS England new standard contracts coming out. There is a requirement for suppliers to provide their DCB 0129. So that's in within the new contract. So it's depending on who your supplier is and what your contract is. So there should be in the future a way of enforcing better collaboration with your supplier. Now, within the standards themselves, there are part of the DCB 0129 requirement is that the supplier does have to provide that documentation to the organisation that's deploying the product. So it is within the standards which are mandated under the Health and Social Care Act. So there is a sort of handle in there. I agree with you, it's not very well enforced, and a lot of suppliers just sidestep it. But I think if you look at some of the new standard contracts coming out from NHS England, that's one way. If a supplier already has a contract with you, I think you have to go back to the DCB standards and just say, look, this is inherent within the DCB standards that you really have to supply the documentation. Now, the standard of the documentation is very variable, as we all know, and that's something else that we're discussing. Again, we use that word kind of with caution with the CQC at the moment. There should be a process whereby there should be some centralised checking on DCB documentation to make sure it's up to standard, because many suppliers aren't doing that. And as you rightly say, without the 029 documentation, it doesn't give you a very strong starting point to start on your other safety work.
Thank you. Adrian, I wonder if you could come in with sort of some practical tips for people who find themselves, like Kimberly, with substandard DCB 129 materials.
Yeah, I think certainly if you're a healthcare organisation, there's one piece of advice I will give you on this, which is look before you leap. If you look at DTAC or some of these other frameworks, they require that a supplier provides you with their clinical safety case report and hazard log before you buy their product. And when you buy a health IT system, nobody would ever buy it without actually looking at it. You'll go through that process of having demonstrations and getting your colleagues on board to give a view. And yet, often people will wait to see the 129 materials the week before go live. That's kind of not how it should work. Now, if you ask for those materials from your supplier and either you don't get them or they are extremely poor quality, what is that telling you about what that supplier is going to work like in that area going forwards? Because they're not going to radically change their ways. So you need to review the supplier's materials, get them and appraise them. And the second point of that is, when those materials are poor quality, you must push back. Why? Because there is no regulator in this area. You are it. If you are the receiving clinical safety officer in a trust, you are the nearest you get to being that regulator. And the problem is, if you just accept it, if you accept nonsense, then not only is that causing a problem for you, but it's causing a problem for the next trust who implements that product. Because if you say, oh, yeah, this is fine, we're completely happy with this, the next time that supplier sells their product, well, when someone does push back, they'll say, well, the trust down the road are completely happy with it. What's wrong with you? Everyone else has been fine with it. So if you don't like what you see, appraise and push back, because it's actually in everyone's best interest, including your supplier.
Thank you. I think Stacey and Lucy were keen to come in on that as well.
Yeah, really great question, Kimberly. Thank you. And I completely agree with regards to DTAC and pushing back. Something I would say is about what I call the one digital door. And it comes back to what you said about procurement earlier, Lucy. But if we've not got those robust processes at the front door, so for instance, our procurement saying, before we go any further, can you provide us with your DCB 0129, DTAC, all this information before they even get into the organisation, a bit like what Adrian was saying? Then we need to create those processes in order to be able to push back, because they want to get in, but we need to ensure that there's good quality information that we're able to get some to go further with.
I was just going to come in from a practical side. So we have had examples where we've had a supplier who didn't have any documentation and was quite adamant that they didn't need it. And we were able to meet with them and gently persuade them that that was not the case. So, you know, and again, we went back to the standards, we went back to the applicability tree from NHSE, and SafeHand have got a version as well that's really helpful. And so we were able to demonstrate to them, actually, you do need to provide it. You are providing this system in a publicly funded way to NHS patients. So we had that, and they actually did go off and get the compliance. But then we've also had a hazard log that came, and it was completely unreadable. So what was in there was unintelligible, but you also couldn't completely read the hazard and the controls, because the boxes didn't expand when they sent it, when they put it into a PDF and sent it off. So again, we went back to that supplier. And we actually worked quite well with them to review their hazard log, and we had a meeting. We went through it together. We went through every single thing on their hazard log together, so that we could understand what applied to the system we were using, what the actual control, So we went through it together, and I think from that they then said they were going to go away and update that so it was in a more intelligible format. So I think you can work well together with suppliers. It doesn't have to be like this kind of battle between, well, they haven't got it, and we, it's about kind of, I suppose it's about educating, really. It's about, educating suppliers as well that this is the case, and that actually, we are getting better in the NHS at requesting this information, and it's only going to be in their best interest, because the next company that comes along, as Adrian said, if they can say, yes, we've got DCB compliance, and other suppliers in their field haven't, it's going to put them ahead, and that's how we kind of, pushed it a little bit with them as well, as it gives them a market competitiveness as well. So yeah, it happens, but yeah, it's just about working with those suppliers, I think, in a productive way. Yeah.
And it serves to highlight patient safety is everybody's responsibility. So working collaboratively is actually in everybody's interest, isn't it? So yeah, well done for that. Any more questions from the floor? I think the roving mic's making its way down to you.
Hi, I'm Antonia, Chief Nursing Information Officer in Sussex Community Trust. My question is about how this fits with improvement work more broadly in a trust. We know that whenever anyone wants to do anything, they have to do 1,000 bits of paperwork and take it to 1 million meetings. And this, while it really is important, sometimes feels to staff like, oh, it's another awful bit of paper we have to fill in, another load of meetings. How do you make that work in your trusts?
Lucy.
So I think it's, if we're looking at the deployment of new systems, it's working really closely together with the project team, so that it kind of feels part of the project development anyway. So it's not this additional piece of work that you've got to do that's completely separate, that's really onerous. It's discovering the product together, and it's building it into that kind of project process of, sitting with them when they have their weekly meetings about their RAID logs, and it's looking at, right, what goes in the RAID log and actually what goes in the hazard log, because that's, separate. So yeah, it's working together, and making it seem like it's all part of the project deployment. And I think that's the only way you can do it safely, because it shouldn't be a separate kind of, siloed process like we've talked about. It needs to be really embedded. And we've trained all of our project teams, so our developers, our project staff, our IT staff, our customer relation manager, our EPR team, they've all had clinical safety or clinical risk management training through SafeHand, so that they're all aware of where it sits in the process, and that it's patient safety and it is their responsibility as well. So yeah, I think it's trying to work alongside the existing processes to build it in.
Sebastian.
Yeah, and I always say that starting work really early on the project is important, and making sure that it's a team responsibility. I agree with you. It does seem that the documentation is sometimes a pain, isn't it, to produce, and difficult and cumbersome, another piece of paperwork. But I think you've got to look at it, in fact, this is a really vital piece of patient safety information for the trust, and making sure that you start on that work very early, just to define the scope, to start writing the baseline documentations. And I think trying to enthuse the team is very important as well, to make sure this is a team effort and not just finding another burdensome item that has to be produced. So I think there's a certain skill in implementation for the team, but remains a kind of team responsibility, rather than being down to the one project manager to say, actually, this is your job to write this report. And also, Adrian's brought up the hazard log. I think these documents have to be live and living, and to be used every single day. So much agree with you on that.
Thank you. I'm not going to ask you to speed talk, Adrian, but you've got 1 minute 42 seconds left.
I can do it in that time. Someone remind me of the original question. It was from
linking it with...
Yeah. How do we stop it becoming administrative activity? So think about it this way. To me, it's a mindset issue. If you go into this process seeing it as an administrative activity, that's exactly what it will be. If you see it as an opportunity to improve your product or implementation, that's what it will become. And I'm going to answer this question actually not from the trust side, but from the supplier side, because it's very common on a daily basis that a supplier will come to us because what they want us to do, and in their own words, they want to tick a box and get us to fill in the form. Now, we're under no illusion when we start working with most suppliers, that is indeed how they see it, and we go with that. That's okay. But what starts to happen is over a period of time, people start to realise that actually this stuff's useful. And by us asking the right questions at the right time, what we start to see our suppliers do very, very gently is to do things in a different way. That piece of functionality that they kind of could have tested in 30 seconds, or they could have done it properly, they'll start to do it properly because they know what we're going to ask. And what we see is maybe a year or two down the line, our 129 customers will say to us, we cannot believe how this process has transformed our organisation. And yet, we don't actually seem to have done anything. And yet they have. And what they've done is they've changed their mindset. So the mindset here is critical when it comes to administration versus actually impacting change.
Thank you. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much for our panel for their valuable contributions today. And if you've got any questions about clinical safety or compliance with the safety standards, do come and see us. We're Safe Hand Consulting and we're on stand C9. Thank you.